Roads and bridges. I also mean water, wastewater projects, our airport modernizations. Broadband is a huge part of that, and I'm probably leaving a couple things out, but I think that's where our core, and I characterized it yesterday as our sweet spot. And when I say sweet spot, I think that's the sweet spot of where we can join together and the American people can actually see us negotiate a package that where we all believe very strongly in devoting the resources, the time and effort into modernizing our infrastructure across the country. So we got a lot of speakers. I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Senator Wicker.
Well, thank you, Senator Capito. And goodness, if we all take 2 minutes, we'll miss lunch. I think we're united that the president's package is not an infrastructure package. It's a huge tax increase. It's a tax increase on job creators. It is a tax increase that would repeal what I believe is a signature accomplishment of Republicans in 2017, and that is to provide job-creating tax relief for America and to make us more competitive internationally. $2.3 trillion is way too big, but we can do an infrastructure package. So I want to take a moment or two to be optimistic. Washington, D.C., and pardon me for my voice, Washington, D.C. needs to show that we can do something big in a bipartisan way. And really, this is an opportunity to do this. We're accustomed to doing broadband. We're accustomed to doing roads and bridges. We're accustomed to doing infrastructure in a bipartisan way, and we've done it time and time again. For us to accommodate our Democratic friends in the White House, we're willing to talk about a much larger infrastructure package than we're used to. I think we welcome that. I think we've been looking for that. But it needs to be paid for, it needs to be reasonable, and it needs to stick to the, I would say, 30% of the president's proposal that is actually infrastructure. And so let me say, we had a good meeting. I, for some reason, was among the first group of 8 to meet with the president and vice president in the Oval Office this week. There'll be others, and I hope those meetings are as lively and engaging and productive as I think this one was. I think this can be bipartisan. I'm going to proceed on the assumption that the president wants, indeed, a bipartisan package, which would be a departure from the reconciliation process that we had earlier. So I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I'm looking on the bright side, and I think if we can do this in a bipartisan way, the American people will benefit.
And my concern, of course, is that the president's approach to this has really been my way or the highway, and if that's an option people have, I think most Americans would choose the highway. And I certainly would. And we talk about roads, bridges. That's what people think of as infrastructure. It helps them get to school, get to work, get home again. But what we've had proposed by the White House is what I believe is a slush fund for liberal spending. And if you take a look at the red box here, that's the amount, $2.7 trillion they're proposing, and you have only $115 billion for roads and bridges. Roads and bridges, a very small portion of this entire amount of Democrat spending on what they're calling infrastructure. So we know what Americans want. They want safe roads. They don't want traffic jams. That's why roads and bridges are what people think about when they talk about infrastructure. But that's not what the president is talking about. He's talking about something the American people aren't talking about. He's putting more money into electric vehicles. You take a look at how much money is set for electric vehicles, $174 billion for electric vehicles. There's more money for electric vehicles than what he's proposing that there is for roads, bridges, highways, ports, airports, and waterways combined. That's what the Democrats are proposing. They really want to do away with the internal combustion engine. That's their goal. the good jobs that are related to those things. They're trying to give the Americans less choice. The other thing that electric vehicles do not do is they don't pay into the highway trust fund. People say, well, raise the gas tax to pay for this thing. Electric vehicles don't pay any of that. They don't pay for the wear and tear that they do on the roads. Electric vehicles, for the most part, are bought by people that are wealthier. They are more expensive vehicles. That's the direction of this administration. American people will know what they want, and if the president wants to work on that, we're all ready to work with him on what we believe is true infrastructure, needed infrastructure for the nation.
If we were to go on the main streets of America and ask the American people, what do you think infrastructure is? I think they would say what we are saying here today, and that is it's about roads, it's about bridges, it's about waterways, it's about ports, it's airports, it's broadband. It's also about water systems, wastewater systems. That's infrastructure. And as Republicans, we need to find a way, working with Democrats, to come together and put together a bipartisan package. It's possible. We moved $4 trillion of COVID relief in the last Congress in a bipartisan way. Yes, it takes more work. Yes, it takes more time. It takes a lot of calls, a lot of meetings. But the American people want to see a bipartisan outcome. Let's get back to what is infrastructure. That would reduce the scope of President Biden's, frankly, many liberal wish list items and come back to what's best for our country. That's the first problem we have to solve, is the scope. The second, of course, is the pay for it. We can move forward with an infrastructure package without raising taxes. We had a great call this morning with several of my members here, Republicans and Democrats, the No Labels Caucus, to talk about ideas that, in fact, Susan Collins had, that we could come together here with possible pay-fors without necessarily raising taxes. That would give us a bipartisan outcome. It's the right thing to do for our country. It's the right thing to show to the American people that we can get something done here in a bipartisan way.
So one element here that's missing, and if the president really wants a bipartisan bill, they need to address it. It's permitting reform. Okay, I know that sounds very boring, but it's very bipartisan. You talk to any mayor, you talk to any governor, doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, they want it. Why do they want it? Because we all know the horror stories, right? In Alaska, my great state, it took 20 years to permit a mine. That mine is now employing 600 people, $100,000 average wage. The SeaTac Airport, when they expanded the runway, 15 years to permit that. 15 years. It takes on average 9 to 19 years to permit a highway in America. This is crazy. This is crazy. This is one of the number one goals of the building trades, the men and women who build things in America. If you don't do permitting reform, you could do a $5 trillion highway bill, and the only people who get a job are the lawyers, the environmental groups, and the bureaucrats, not the men and women who build stuff, which is why the trades want this so much. And finally, if you can do reform where you can say, hey, this highway project will take three years to permit, not 10, you will see a huge influx of private capital into our infrastructure system. So we need permitting reform. It's bipartisan. The president has ignored it. We're going to put it in our package.
One of the things I've noticed since I came to the Senate is how much underutilized talent there is in the Senate in both parties. And last year, that talent rolled up its sleeves and put out of the EPW committee under the leadership of John Barrasso a bill that passed unanimously out of committee. In last year's very confrontational and acerbic environment around here, they put out a highway bill unanimously. That should be the framework for how to get this done. That should be the framework for what is infrastructure. And as my other committee ranking member said, on commerce, we can add things like broadband. We can have ports. We can pass bills like we did under the leadership of Tom Carper and Shelley Moore Capito and Tammy Duckworth and I, who passed a bill out of committee, once again unanimously at EPW, to deal with water systems, ways to make sure the Clean Air Act and Safe Drinking Water Act are properly administered and that communities have the funds they need to make sure that water is safe, clean, and delivered to everyone. These are infrastructure bills that are already being adopted, and not to consider a bipartisan approach up until now that would expand the definition of infrastructure to the point where some groups even say it's going to cost more jobs than it creates is a huge mistake. I strongly urge the Biden administration to take what's already been drafted, already been passed unanimously, and work with it as the best starting point they could possibly find.
I want to follow up with what Senator Sullivan said. It really matters, permitting. I just finished 2 years ago as governor of Florida. We spent actually $85 billion on real infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, and seaports. We have 15 seaports. We have 19 airports. We spent a fortune, and the way we did it is we grew our economy, and we do it by, we cut taxes almost 100 times. We cut 5,000 regulations, and we dramatically streamlined the permitting process. So this is all can be done, but what the Democrats are focused on is big government, big taxes, and big liberal agenda. So what we need to do is lower taxes, less regulation, streamline the permitting, and we can invest in real infrastructure.
Infrastructure is something we should work on together. You've heard that from my colleagues, and I certainly agree with it. Infrastructure is also something that's in my DNA. My dad was a civil engineer. He was the leader of the Department of Roads in Nebraska under a Republican and a Democrat governor. I served as the chairman of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee in the Nebraska legislature, where we were able to get big things done for the state of Nebraska. We've done that here in the Congress as well. We passed the FAST Act with over 80 votes. We passed FAA reauthorization with over 90 votes. In the Senate, we unanimously passed the Water Resource Development Bill and my pipeline bill. This is infrastructure. You know, let's not be fooled. We all know what infrastructure is. You can ask any American and they will tell you. It's roads, it's bridges, it's waterways, it's airports, it's ports, it's broadband. These are the big projects that we need to get done for this country, that we need to invest in for this country. We've always done it in the past. It's a bipartisan issue, and we need to come together now. I was with Senator Wicker at the White House with that first group, bipartisan, bicameral group that met with President Biden and his administration. And yes, we have some differences, but this is a bill that we should be able to get done for the American people in a bipartisan manner, to be able to bring it together, to show we can work together, but also to show that we realize what the true investments are in this country to make it continue to grow and be the best in the world.
Folks, I have been hearing from Iowans over the past several weeks about what infrastructure actually is, because there is a very confusing definition out there right now coming from the Biden administration. Of course, for Iowans, when they think about infrastructure, they are thinking about roads and bridges, our locks and dam system on the Mississippi, which takes our great agricultural products down south, where it can be loaded on ships and exported to other countries. And that's what Iowans think about when they think about infrastructure. But what we see with this new definition of infrastructure, the $2 trillion package that the Biden administration is pushing, is really a liberal wish list. It is grouping things together for big labor and providing them with big perks, as well as elements of the Green New Deal. That's not infrastructure, folks. Now, in the last Congress, on the EPW committee, of which many of us are a member of that committee, we came out with a plan where Republicans and Democrats agreed on what infrastructure was. It was a very focused, targeted plan that worked for the American people, and it came out of committee unanimously. Mr. Biden, President Biden, I am urging you to go back, take a look at that bill, that starting point. Let's talk about what infrastructure actually is, and let's get back to bipartisanship. The next time you have a meeting in the Oval Office, let's make sure it's not just a photo op, but a true push for a bipartisan solution to infrastructure.
I'm the ranking member of the Senate Transportation Appropriations Committee, the former chair. So I have an enormous interest in this issue. I have long been for a robust infrastructure package. I believe everyone here would agree that we do need an investment. But there are three issues with the administration's package. The first is its scope. You've heard each of my colleagues discuss the scope of this package. Also, the emphasis on putting in portions of the Green New Deal, spending more money, $174 billion, on electric vehicles than on roads, bridges, airports, and seaports combined. The scope is an issue that we have to deal with. Now, I think all of us agree that the old definition of infrastructure probably would not have included broadband. Today, all of us understand that broadband is an essential part of our infrastructure, along with roads, bridges, airports, seaports, waterways, and water treatment plants. But of course, the president's proposal goes way beyond that. The second issue is the top-line cost of the president's proposal. When you add the money that has been spent on the 5 COVID relief bills last year, which were all necessary, and all of them were bipartisan, the $1.9 trillion partisan bill that passed earlier this year, and now the president's proposed infrastructure package, we're talking about approximately $10 trillion in new spending. $10 trillion. And the third issue is the pay-fors issue, which my colleagues have also discussed. We need to be creative, but obviously it is much easier to come up with appropriate pay-fors and bipartisan agreement if we're talking about a more focused package that truly is centered on infrastructure. I look forward to being part of that effort. Steve Daines mentioned that this morning we had a great bipartisan, bicameral, no labels call to discuss this, and I'm optimistic that we can achieve results. Last but certainly not least, they saved the best for last, apparently, John Cornyn.
Well, you could be forgiven for your confusion about what constitutes infrastructure and what does not constitute infrastructure. You heard from Senator Capito. She used the phrase core infrastructure. And then I guess there's peripheral infrastructure. And then there's the Biden administration's definition of infrastructure, which is just another Trojan horse for a lot of unrelated policy objectives that they have. But as you've heard from all of our colleagues, there's pretty much a consensus when it comes to the core infrastructure, what we need to do. The committees of jurisdiction have passed those authorization bills before, and they can do it again with bipartisan support. The one time when you hear nothing but crickets is when it comes time to pay for it. But I agree with, I think it was Senator Wicker who said, we don't need to raise taxes on the American people. Coming out of a recession, when we're just trying to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't need to raise taxes on the American people. We need to grow our economy and create jobs and get back to the next normal. What I believe we need to do is to come up with a responsible way to pay for that core infrastructure. And I agree with those comments that broadband, maybe that was something we thought in the past was kind of a convenience or optional. It is a necessity now. People being able to access telemedicine, children, students being able to access education. So that's something I think we could all find agreement on. So I got an idea. Let's take a blank piece of paper and we can write on it, Democrats and Republicans, what you believe infrastructure is. Does it include? And I bet you could come up with a core infrastructure agreement. And then if there are other ideas like broadband we want to add to it, let's do it on a bipartisan basis. And then we turn to how do you pay for it? And then we go out and look for 60 votes to be able to proceed to a floor vote on the Senate floor and come up with something that will be a win for the American people.
You guys have a question? I got a question. Yeah.
I have a question. So, as Republicans, will you be putting out sort of a unified GOP proposal? Will we see that in opposition to the Biden?
I think what you're going to see is a lot of what you've heard from us today is a conceptual Republican bill that we think addresses the core issues that we've talked about, along with the way that we would say that you can pay for it without raising taxes. We're working on that right now. We haven't made consensus on it, but a conceptual document probably. Last question, yeah.
I certainly wouldn't ask you to negotiate in public, but is there any change to the corporate tax code that would be acceptable to you all, or is that kind of a red line, like that number cannot be touched?
Well, I can tell you just for myself, and I don't know, anybody else who wants to speak, please do. I voted for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It had the desired effect of bringing capital back into this country, no corporate inversions, higher wages, lower unemployment, better diversity in our workforce than we've ever seen. I mean, historic highs. At this point in time, no. I think that's a non-negotiable red line. I supported that bill. I still believe strongly in the effects that it not just had then, but will have in the future. So for me personally, that's a non-starter. I don't agree.
Good answer. Assume it's unanimous.
All right, last question. Yeah.
We've heard some talk that there's at least some Republicans that are floating a $600 to $800 billion infrastructure number. Is that in the range of what you're comfortable with, or too early to say? I think it's too early to say right now. I think that, I'm working, Roger and I are working together, many folks are working who are on relevant committees to try to put together what you heard were our, and I'll say it again, core infrastructure ideas. Deb's working over on Commerce too on that. And so I think when we put all that together, we're going to look at what kind of numbers we have. I think you've heard our desire for something robust. We understand it as a job creator, and we understand we're behind. And so we don't have a detailed figure attached to that, and it probably won't be I wouldn't think an amount certain, more of a range of where we think we could fall and begin as a negotiating point. This is what I didn't understand about the COVID negotiations with the president. He criticized the 10 of us, and I was one of that group, we were criticized for coming in at 600 when he was way up at 1.9 trillion. And then he says we were stuck on that, which was an incorrect statement, and I think we made a statement to that effect. But he never came down. I mean, I thought a negotiation was when you kind of move one way and move the other, and you try to meet more towards the middle. That's what we're expecting here, and that's what we've done through these bills, and that's what we look forward to. So, thank you all.